Hi everyone, my name is Julia Cisneros. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and today I'm going to be talking about some work that I've done with my colleague and peer graduate student Aida Gulencozy, and how we are trying to encourage young Black and Indigenous people of color and Latinx students to become geoscientists. So I hope that by sharing our work and our journey towards doing this, it'll help you identify some strategies towards improving diversity and inclusion in your departments, institutions, or wherever you are. So a few years ago, this paper came out, which essentially says that geosciences is the least diverse field in STEM, and there's been no progress on that diversity in 40 years. And a few of you may be familiar with this, and in fact, Dr. Rachel Bernard was the previous speaker. And so this sort of sparked a conversation between Aida and I, and we started to think and look into literature regarding this topic. And we found that this conversation has been happening over the last few decades. And so this sort of made us think, how the heck are we here? Aida and I are both Latinas in geosciences, and so we represent this group that's underrepresented. And this sort of made us kind of go back into our journeys and think, how did we become geoscientists? And through going through that conversation, we both found a very interesting commonality. And that was that we both attended geoscience camps when we were younger. And so I attended a geoscience camp at A&M, Texas A&M University, and Aida attended a geoscience camp at NASA. And these were local institution-based and concerted efforts to incorporate students from various backgrounds, but they were aimed at recruiting underrepresented students. They were project-based, and they were guided. And so through this, Aida and I realized that, the camp was sort of the moment that we thought, hey, I could do this. I could be a geoscientist. And we decided that we wanted to give that opportunity to other girls. And so we ran the Geoscience Camp for Girls. This was at the School of Earth, Society, and Environment at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. We ran this last year, October 2019. The camp was graduate student led. We had a diverse representation of geoscientists, and it was all volunteer driven, mostly through graduate students. And the resources that we used existed, were donated, or were minimal costs. And so we had successfully gotten 30 middle school girls from the local community to come to our school and learn about geoscience topics. And it was a total success. The girls learned about geoscience topics. They had a blast. We built successful mentorship relationships with them. In fact, a camper approached me and said that she wanted to apply for a Name the Rover contest. And I was like, yes, awesome, let's do it. And so it was really fun. And the cool thing was that several girls asked to come back the next year. So then we started to think, okay, how do we make this happen again? These girls, they want to come back. They want to learn more. And we began asking ourselves questions. The first being, what would this have looked like if faculty had run the geoscience camp? We are graduate students, and that's something that we had to think about. What happens if we want to run this camp and we're not here anymore? Where did our support come from, and what did that look like? And also, what did we learn about the process to hopefully create a regular iteration? And these questions required and demanded a reflection and critical examination of our journeys towards GCamp. And so we started to think about, how did we end up getting this camp up and running? So we identified 3 different parts to our journey in creating the camp. The first being roadblocks. So when we had initially proposed the camp, we thought, okay, we'll go to our institution, we'll go say to the board of directors, and we'll say we want to run a camp, and they'll say, okay, we can help you with that. We know it's going to be difficult, but here are the steps that we can take. And we realized pretty quickly that we were going to run into a roadblock, and that roadblock being unpassable institutional barriers. So in this case, there was actually a lack of institutional knowledge and infrastructure to run a camp. And so we sort of had to backtrack, and we had to sort of take a longer route and a more complicated route, but in the end we finally got there. But as we thought about that longer route, we realized that there were also other roadblocks that we had run into. For example, policy limitations. We had resource restrictions. It turns out it's really hard to reserve quad space as a graduate student. And we had things like limited community channels, and we had some difficulty in how to get the girls to our school. So we had a lack of transportation opportunities. We also realized through kind of thinking about our journey that we ran into a few detours as well, but we identified these detours as being passable institutional barriers. And that's because, you know, they were difficult, but through our hard work and our effort, we were able to actually get around them. A few of those being gaining support through graduate student volunteers, getting funding resources, using campus and technological resources, but sort of repurposing them so that they would work for the girls. And then also identifying recruitment strategies. Were we going to go to the schools in person? Were we going to do this online? And how were we going to get connected to those girls and their families? But as you know, while we were able to get around the detours, we still had these major roadblocks. And we sort of thought, okay, you know, thinking back, how did we get around those roadblocks? And we realized that we were able to do that through taking alternative routes. And that was made possible through supportive systems outside of the institution. So things like policy limitations, we were able to get around that because the local middle school gave us resources for policy language. We were able to get access to the students and recruit because we were able to use established communication channels. So in this case, the principal actually emailed all the parents for us and told them about our camp and how to get in contact with us. We are able also to use limited funding opportunities for student needs that the local school had in order to get transportation options to get the girls from their school to our university. And so while this route sort of took a little bit longer, you can see that, you know, we eventually got there. We created the Geoscience camp. And so we deemed this route Community Way. And that sort of takes us to our next idea, which is, what is the difference between Institutional Boulevard and Community Way? And really the major difference was that the community offered alternative routes around the unpassable institutional barriers. So as we started to go through this, we realized that, you know, we needed to summarize the difficulties we had in navigating these institutional structures, or at least figure out why they weren't passable if we were going to think about how do we pass them in the future. And so the ways that we realized that they were not passable for us was that we had an outsider perspective on internal organizations and connections. We had ideas, but we lacked the institutional knowledge and infrastructure. And also we lacked power to create alternative routes because we were acting as individual agents. And so in order to create bypassing structures, we tried to gain institutional support. And we did that through presenting at public presentations. For example, we presented the camp and what we did and what we wanted to do in the future at a SESI-wide event. We also, at that event, encouraged people to come to a workshop that we were going to be running to share the institutional knowledge that we had gained in creating the camp, and hopefully begin to transfer the organizational labor to a more you know, wider committee that could sort of do this consistently and iteratively. But in the end, we were unable to repurpose the tools that we had gained as graduate students to bypass the embedded barriers of the institution. And that was kind of a bummer because we still wanted to run the camp. So then we started to think, okay, how can we run the camp still? And we started to lean on the community support for success because that's what we found had worked for us. So we continued building strong relationships. We continued communicating between us and the parents and the campers. We continued meeting with science coordinators and volunteering at school events. Here's a picture of Aida volunteering at an event from the local school that we had done 2 years in a row at that point. And as we started to do this, the schools and the parents began asking us for more opportunities to have their students engage. The girls and their students, they really liked learning about geosciences. And as we started to do that and we started to gain our leadership and organizational skills, we became really confident in how we were doing this. We were able to mobilize really quickly. And, you know, if a school said, hey, we have an event next week, we could say, yeah, we have these 3 activities. We can go there, we can run that, and we can get these volunteers to go there. And so we were starting to get confident. We were like, okay, yeah, we can run the camp again. We can do this. And sadly, COVID-19 occurred, and that really created the final rupture in the little support that we had to create the second iteration of camp. And we realized that we could no longer continue the camp within the institution. And so Aida and I went back to the drawing board and we created geoscienceslearners.com. So here we see this as an opportunity to grow outside of the confines of our institution and create our own structures that are grounded in community engagement. And really the idea here is to create online opportunities for the girls to continue engaging in these geoscience topics, even if there's not a camp that's occurring. So to summarize, from our perspective, graduate students are individual agents. They lean on support systems already in place, and they do not have power to create new systems. They are seen as transient members of the university, and so they only have a limited amount of time that they can do things. But still, graduate students offer innovative and concrete skills towards building strategies to increase diversity and inclusion in the geosciences. And so to unlock the greatest level of student potential, universities must provide clear and tangible infrastructure for navigable paths forward, or they risk losing, you know, all that potential from graduate students and all of those great ideas and strategies towards improving diversity and inclusion in the geosciences. So I want to say thank you so much for having me. Thank you for listening and listening to our journey, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day at the Pardee Symposium.